In the shadows of an abandoned warehouse in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a young girl's life was shattered, and so was her family's trust in justice. This is the story of Chanel Brooks, a vibrant 16-year-old whose world came crashing down on July 15, 2008, and her father Lamont, whose quest for truth would eventually become a chilling tale of revenge against the very system that failed them both. It's also the story of three off-duty police officers, Michael Bryson, Thomas Hoffman, and Kevin Ridgway, who thought they could get away with murder, until revenge came knocking. The night began like any other in the sweltering heat of a Louisiana summer. The camera pans over the dilapidated warehouse, its cracked walls and rusted doors standing as silent witnesses to the horrors that unfolded within. Inside, darkness envelopes everything, broken only by flickering streetlights filtering through boarded-up windows. In this desolate place, Chanel's cries for help pierce the silence, a desperate plea for mercy that goes unanswered. Her voice echoes through the empty halls, haunting and raw, before fading into eerie stillness. On that night, Chanel Brooks became a victim of unimaginable brutality at the hands of those sworn to protect her. But what happened next revealed something far more sinister, a web of corruption so deep it stretched beyond the confines of that warehouse, reaching into the highest echelons of law enforcement and the judicial system. What should have been a straightforward case of assault turned into a labyrinth of lies, suppressed evidence, and intimidated witnesses, all designed to bury the truth and shield the perpetrators from accountability. As the scene fades into darkness, one question lingers in the air. How could such a heinous crime go unpunished? And what price must be paid when justice fails? Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Vic's True Crime Stories if you want more gripping tales like this one. Your support helps bring these stories to audiences who care about truth and justice. In the days leading up to that fateful night, Chanel Brooks was like any other 16-year-old, full of life, dreams, and aspirations. She spoke often of becoming a nurse, inspired by her compassion for others and her desire to make a difference in the world. Her smile lit up every room she entered, and her presence brought warmth to those around her. But beneath this bright exterior lay a young woman who trusted too easily, a vulnerability that would soon be cruelly exploited. On July 15, 2008, everything changed. That evening, Chanel found herself near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, a place she had no reason to fear. What happened next defied comprehension. Three off-duty police officers, Michael Bryson, Thomas Hoffman, and Kevin Ridgway, abducted her while intoxicated, dragging her into the shadows where they committed unspeakable acts of violence. By the time help arrived, Chanel's body bore the marks of their brutality. Broken ribs, cranial trauma, and injuries so severe they painted a harrowing picture of what she endured. The immediate aftermath was chaos, but not the kind that leads to justice. Instead, it spiraled into a calculated cover-up orchestrated by the very people tasked with upholding the law. Evidence began disappearing almost immediately. Bodycam footage vanished without explanation, DNA samples were mishandled or lost, and witness statements mysteriously altered. Those brave enough to speak out were met with threats and intimidation, their voices silenced before they could reach the ears of authorities. Even medical documentation detailing Chanel's injuries seemed powerless against the machinery of denial. For Chanel's family, the fight for justice felt impossible. They filed complaints, demanded investigations, and pleaded for answers, but their cries fell on deaf ears. The system turned its back on them, dismissing their claims as baseless or exaggerated. Meanwhile, the media ignored Chanel's case, choosing instead to focus on sensationalized headlines about rising crime rates in Baton Rouge. Her story became just another statistic, buried under layers of apathy and indifference. But little did they know, this was only the beginning of a battle that would span years and cost lives. The seeds of vengeance had already been planted, nurtured by grief and rage, waiting to bloom in ways no one could have predicted. As Chanel's father, Lamont, struggled to come to terms with his loss, he vowed silently to uncover the truth, no matter the consequences. For him, justice wasn't just a word, it was a promise he made to his daughter, a debt he owed to her memory. And so, the stage was set for a clash between the forces of corruption and the unyielding determination of a grieving father. In the wake of Chanel's death, Lamont Brooks sought answers that the system refused to provide. Consumed by grief and driven by a father's instinct to protect, he confronted the officers responsible for his daughter's assault: Michael Bryson, Thomas Hoffman, and Kevin Ridgway. It was an act born of desperation, a plea for accountability in a world that had already turned its back on Chanel. But instead of justice, Lamont found himself framed as the aggressor. Despite overwhelming evidence of police misconduct, the same evidence that could have vindicated Chanel, the officers twisted the narrative, painting Lamont as a violent troublemaker. Within weeks, he stood trial, convicted not on facts but on bias and manipulation. The verdict came swiftly: 10 years behind bars. Behind those cold prison walls, Lamont's world shrank to the size of his cell, yet his spirit only grew larger. The weight of his grief became both anchor and fuel, grounding him even as it propelled him forward. During his decade-long imprisonment, Lamont discovered solace and purpose in an unlikely place: the prison butcher shop. There, amidst the sharp gleam of knives and the rhythmic precision of cutting, he found a strange kind of peace. Over time, he mastered the art of butchering, learning the nuances of flesh and bone, of control and discipline. To some, it might have seemed like mere survival, a way to pass the days, but to Lamont, it was more than that. Each cut, each slice, became a metaphor for the precision he would one day bring to his quest for justice. Yet, for all the skills he honed, Lamont's mind remained consumed by Chanel. Her laughter echoed in the silence of his nights. Her dreams haunted the edges of his waking hours. He carried her memory like a torch, burning brightly against the darkness of despair. They took everything from her. They took her life, her dignity, her future. And they tried to take mine too. But I won't let them win. Not now, not ever. I made a promise to you, Chanel, and I'll keep it if it kills me. They'll pay for what they did, for what they let happen. Every last one of them. His rage simmered beneath the surface, tempered only by the knowledge that revenge required patience. In prison, Lamont maintained an exemplary record, earning trust where none should have been given. He bided his time, studying every detail of his captors' routines, memorizing their weaknesses, and crafting a plan so meticulous it bordered on obsession. Behind his calm exterior lay a storm waiting to unleash itself upon those who had destroyed his family. Behind bars, Lamont honed his skills as a butcher, a trade that would later serve as both a metaphor for precision and a tool for retribution. But his mind never strayed far from the promise he made to Chanel, to expose the truth, no matter the cost. If you're loving this deep dive into the darker side of justice, don't forget to share this video with friends who enjoy true crime stories. Their engagement helps us reach even more viewers like you. Together, we can continue exploring the complexities of crime, punishment, and redemption. 10 years of silence, 10 years of planning, and now the moment had come. Lamont Brooks emerged from prison a changed man. A man who carried with him not just the weight of his own suffering but the unspoken cries of his daughter, Chanel. His revenge was not born of impulsivity but of precision, each step meticulously calculated to mirror the trauma inflicted upon Chanel. This was no ordinary vendetta. It was an act of poetic justice, a reckoning designed to expose the rot at the heart of the system that had failed them both. On October 12, 2018, Michael Bryson met his end in the gym where he once trained to uphold the law. The room was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic clang of weights being lifted and set down, a sound that would soon be replaced by something far more sinister. Bryson never saw it coming. Lamont's approach was silent, deliberate, each movement honed by years of practice. With the same precision he had learned in the butcher shop, Lamont inflicted wounds that mirrored Chanel's injuries, breaking ribs and causing cranial trauma in a chilling recreation of her assault. But this time, there would be no cover-up. Every cut, every blow, was a testament to Chanel's pain, a reminder of the betrayal she endured. As Bryson lay dying, Lamont stood over him, his voice steady yet tinged with emotion. "You took everything from her," he whispered, the words cutting deeper than any blade ever could. "Now you'll pay." The scene was cleaned so thoroughly that no trace remained, leaving behind only questions and whispers of a phantom justice. 2 weeks later, on November 3, 2018, Thomas Hoffman faced his reckoning in his office, a place meant for order and control transformed into a chamber of horror. For 8 long hours, Lamont subjected Hoffman to a psychological and physical ordeal, forcing him to confront the truth about his actions. Each hour brought new revelations, Hoffman's resolve crumbling under the weight of his guilt. Missing case files tied to Chanel's assault disappeared during the night, taking with them secrets that might have condemned others to silence forever. In his final moments, Hoffman pleaded for mercy, his voice cracking with fear. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he sobbed, though his words rang hollow against the backdrop of Chanel's suffering. Lamont listened without emotion, storing Hoffman's confession away as another piece of evidence in his crusade against corruption. He stored Hoffman's body in a freezer, preserving both the man and his sins for posterity. Finally, on November 17th, Kevin Ridgway, the man who had risen through the ranks to become sheriff despite his role in the cover-up, met his fate in the very warehouse where Chanel had been assaulted. The setting was symbolic, a return to the scene of the crime where justice would finally be served. For 12 grueling hours, Lamont orchestrated a methodical dismantling of Ridgway's psyche, extracting confessions that laid bare the full extent of systemic corruption. Ridgway broke early, his facade of authority crumbling under the relentless pressure. Tears streamed down his face as he confessed to orchestrating the cover-up, detailing how evidence had been tampered with, witnesses intimidated, and complaints dismissed. In his final moments, Ridgway begged for forgiveness, but Lamont offered none. Instead, he retrieved Chanel's suicide note from the wreckage of Ridgway's confession, ensuring her voice would echo beyond the grave. Through it all, Lamont wrestled with his own emotions. Did he feel satisfaction? Perhaps, but it was fleeting, overshadowed by the emptiness that lingered in its wake. As he worked through his plan, moments of reflection crept in, questioning whether his actions truly brought closure or merely perpetuated the cycle of violence. Is this what Chanel wanted? He wondered aloud in the solitude of his nights. Or am I becoming the monster they feared? Yet, even amidst these doubts, Lamont knew his mission extended beyond personal vengeance. His revenge wasn't just about punishment, it was about exposing the rot at the heart of the system. With every blow, he chipped away at the facade of authority and integrity that had failed Chanel so spectacularly. As the dawn broke on November 18th, Lamont stepped back from the wreckage of his enemies, knowing that his work was done. The system had been shaken, its flaws exposed, and Chanel's story finally told. But for Lamont, the journey was far from over. Justice had been served, but healing would take longer, and perhaps, he realized, it would never fully arrive. Still, he pressed on, driven by the promise he had made to his daughter, to ensure that her voice would never be silenced again. 10 years of silence, 10 years of planning. Lamont Brooks emerged from prison a man transformed. His grief and rage forged into a weapon as sharp and precise as the knives he had mastered in the butcher shop. His revenge was not born of blind fury but of calculated precision, each act designed to mirror the trauma Chanel endured, exposing the truth that had been buried for so long. This was no ordinary vendetta. It was an act of poetic justice, a reckoning meant to dismantle the system that had failed them both. Through it all, Lamont wrestled with his own emotions. Did he feel satisfaction? Perhaps, but it was fleeting, overshadowed by the emptiness that lingered in its wake. As he worked through his plan, moments of reflection crept in, questioning whether his actions truly brought closure or merely perpetuated the cycle of violence. Is this what Chanel wanted? He wondered aloud in the solitude of his nights. Or am I becoming the monster they feared? Yet, even amidst these doubts, Lamont knew his mission extended beyond personal vengeance. His revenge wasn't just about punishment, it was about exposing the rot at the heart of the system. With every blow, he chipped away at the facade of authority and integrity that had failed Chanel so spectacularly. For Ridgway, the final hours were marked by desperation and despair. As Lamont pressed him for answers, Ridgway's composure shattered, revealing the fear and guilt that had haunted him for years. "We thought we could get away with it," he cried, his voice trembling. "We thought no one would care about some girl from Baton Rouge." His confession exposed more than just his own crimes. It revealed the depths of institutional betrayal, the way those sworn to protect had instead preyed upon the vulnerable. In that moment, Ridgway became not just a victim of Lamont's wrath but a symbol of the systemic failure that had allowed such atrocities to occur. As the dawn broke on November 18th, Lamont stepped back from the wreckage of his enemies, knowing that his work was done. The system had been shaken, its flaws exposed, and Chanel's story finally told. But for Lamont, the journey was far from over. Justice had been served, but healing would take longer, and perhaps, he realized, it would never fully arrive. Still, he pressed on, driven by the promise he had made to his daughter, to ensure that her voice would never be silenced again. In the quiet aftermath of his vengeance, Lamont understood that true justice was not found in bloodshed but in the truth, a truth that would ripple outward, demanding accountability and change long after his blade had fallen silent. Chanel's recovered suicide note and Ridgway's confession became the spark that ignited a nationwide firestorm of outrage. The note, once buried in silence, now served as undeniable proof of the systemic betrayal Chanel had endured. Its words, raw, anguished, and accusatory, resonated with millions who had long suspected that justice was not blind but skewed toward those in power. Protesters took to the streets, their voices rising in unison, demanding accountability and reform. Signs reading "Justice for Chanel" and "No More Silence" filled city squares across the country, while hashtags like #Chanel Brooks Matters trended globally on social media. The public outcry was deafening, a collective cry for change that could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, internal affairs investigators delved deeper into the case, uncovering layers of corruption so vast they threatened to unravel the very fabric of the institutions meant to uphold the law. High-ranking officials were implicated, their names splashed across headlines as resignations poured in. Evidence of witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and judicial collusion came to light, exposing a web of deceit that stretched far beyond the 3 officers involved in Chanel's assault. Yet, despite these revelations, key pieces of evidence were mysteriously destroyed, leaving critical questions unanswered. Was this destruction accidental or deliberate? And how many other cases might have been tainted by similar corruption? The world finally heard Chanel's voice, but at what cost? Her tragedy ignited a movement, yet it also revealed how deeply entrenched corruption can be within institutions meant to serve and protect. For every resignation and every reform proposal, there lingered the haunting realization that such atrocities could, and likely did, happen again unless systemic changes were made. Want more stories that explore the complexities of justice and human nature? Hit that subscribe button now and join Vic's True Crime Stories community. Every like, comment, and share helps grow our audience of truth seekers. Together, let's continue uncovering the stories that demand to be told. On November 20, 2018, Lamont Brooks was arrested, his journey of vengeance coming to an abrupt halt. Yet, even as handcuffs restrained his hands, his spirit remained unbroken. Encoded notebooks discovered during the arrest revealed the meticulous planning behind his actions, further validating his claims and leaving little doubt about the depth of corruption he sought to expose. Public opinion split sharply. Some hailed him as a hero, a symbol of resistance against a broken system, while others labeled him a murderer whose methods blurred the line between justice and vigilantism. Regardless of perspective, one truth remained undeniable. Chanel's story had been told, her voice amplified beyond what she could have ever imagined. In death, Chanel found a strange kind of immortality, a symbol of resistance against systemic betrayal. Her tragedy became a rallying cry for reform, sparking conversations that extended far beyond Baton Rouge. People began questioning the systems meant to protect them, demanding answers about consent, trust, and societal stigma. Chanel's legacy lived on not just in protests and policy changes, but in the hearts of those who refused to look away from the harsh realities she represented. Lamont's transformation was equally profound. What started as raw grief and rage evolved into something more complex, a mission driven by purpose and fueled by love for the daughter he had lost. Through his calculated rage, he ensured Chanel's voice would never be silenced again. Though his actions carried consequences, they also forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and accountability. In the end, Lamont's story wasn't just about revenge. It was about healing, about finding meaning in loss and using pain as a catalyst for change. As the dust settled, both Chanel and Lamont left an indelible mark on the world. Their names became synonymous with the fight for justice, reminding everyone that true change often begins with the courage to speak out, even when the odds seem insurmountable. In death, Chanel found closure, and in reflection, Lamont found purpose. Together, their story inspired countless others to challenge the status quo and strive for a future where no one is forgotten, no voice goes unheard, and justice truly prevails. In death, Chanel found a strange kind of immortality, a symbol of resistance against systemic betrayal. And through his calculated rage, Lamont ensured her voice would never be silenced again.